A big Broncos trade on Wednesday. Devon Vele is now a New Orleans Saint. And yeah, there's an impact for Pat Bryant and Troy Franklin and their reasons why the Broncos traded Devaughn Vele, but there's an impact beyond those two and reasons beyond those two, and there's plenty to discuss. Going to dive into that on this edition of Denver Football After Dark. I'd like to redo that, by the way, because the slide didn't go properly, but there we go. Not smooth. Not the smooth opening we wanted on this trade edition of Denver Football After Dark, but we'll deal with it. It's probably the last time we'll have Devon Vele as the opening slide. I guess if there's New Orleans football after dark with the New Orleans skyline, there'll be a shot of him like that. But now Devon Vele is a New Orleans Saint. And the Broncos turned a 7th-round pick into a 41-catch rookie season, the most productive rookie season for a wide receiver who was a 7th-round pick in 18 years, since going all the way back to Marcus Colston back in 2006. And they get another 7th-round pick back, and they get a 4th-round pick, and potentially a very valuable 4th-round pick, as we'll get into here on this edition of Denver Football After Dark. Turn the music down. Let's get into Devon Vele, now a New Orleans Saint. And let's face it, this trade, I don't think it came as a great shock that Devon Vele was dealt. I think maybe the timing of it, thinking it might have happened closer to the roster deadline. Some of these trades sometimes happen in the 24 to 48 hours before the deadline, but it was a very active day around the NFL in terms of trades. So teams that want to make these moves, they're going ahead and making these moves now, before the preseason finale, kind of starting to set things. I mean, if you know what you need, go ahead and make that deal. And by all accounts, the Broncos had multiple suitors and probably were starting to put out feelers and test the market, test the waters even before this. And part of that is you're out there, you're making calls, you're starting to kind of figure things out, and teams know what's going on. They know what other teams have roster-wise, and it's certainly not a secret around the NFL that Pat Bryant's doing well. It's not a secret around the NFL that Troy Franklin is coming on. And, of course, the big thing on top of that is Courtland Sutton signing his extension. And so that, as far as things that happened that led to this trade, you actually have to start there with Courtland Sutton signing a 4-year extension, because even though effectively it's a 3-year type of deal, Sutton signing that extension means he's here for a while, and you did just draft Pat Bryant, and you drafted Troy Franklin last year. So you have all these young receivers, and if they're doing well, and oh, by the way, you just extended Courtland Sutton, and oh, by the way, Bo Nix really likes Courtland Sutton, and so that's going to be one of the receivers. And then you have Marvin Mims Jr., who at the minimum has established himself as part of that mix. He's not necessarily the Sean Payton perfect template, but with his speed, the ability to use him on end arounds, the ability to plug him in the slot, the expansion of the route tree that we've talked about both here and in orange and blue today. He's making himself into more of a weapon. I do think it's significant that you could say Courtland Sutton's most active days so far this summer were the joint practice days, and I think we'll probably see just how much Courtland Sutton's menu has expanded when we get into the regular season. I suspect that they've been holding back some of the things that they're going to do with Courtland Sutton in the practices that those of us with prying eyes in the media have been witnessing. And I think that's got something to do with, hey, we're sitting there in training camp and fans are watching the practices and media is watching the practices. And because of that, things do get talked about because there are public witnesses. And sometimes as you get down to the nitty gritty closer to the season, when the doors get closed, there are additional things that get worked on. So I think some of the things that are going to be part of the expansion of the Courtland Sutton or the Marvin Mims Jr. menu are some things that maybe that were worked on in the off season and are going to be worked on when the doors get shut. So you have Courtland Sutton, you have Marvin Mims Jr., and then you have these two receivers drafted in the last two drafts in Troy Franklin and Pat Bryant. They're doing well. And then another thing on Pat Bryant. Let's go back to June and minicamp, mandatory minicamp, when Devaughn Vele isn't out there. He's injured, doesn't take part. And what were we talking about coming out of minicamp? We were talking about Pat Bryant emerging when Devaughn Vele wasn't out there. Pat Bryant was one of the big stories of minicamp. And sometimes what can happen is, you might have seen like a little bit of a Wally Pipp thing, going back the old thing when Lou Gehrig came in the lineup for Wally Pipp, and Lou Gehrig didn't leave the lineup for 12 years and set a consecutive games played streak for the New York Yankees that eventually Cal Ripken Jr. surpassed. And it's where basically when you say someone got pipped, I mean, that term entered the lexicon, right? And I think maybe to some degree, Devaughn Vele might have gotten pipped a bit because we had these 3 days where Pat Bryant comes in when Devaughn Vele is out and looks pretty darn good. And at that point, when you see that, you start to maybe think, okay, what happens if Pat Bryant gets these reps and not Devaughn Vele? And then, of course, the other layer on that is Troy Franklin having an exceptional offseason, and then he builds on that in training camp. So you've got these two young receivers who are doing very well. And then, and this is cold calculus bottom line, Devaughn Vele is going to be 28 years old in December, and Pat Bryant and Troy Franklin are both 22. I mean, these things do matter. And if they're tied on all accounts, what are you going to break a tie with? You're probably going to break a tie with something like age, with one receiver being 22 and one receiver being 27. Devaughn Vele, it's a reason why he lasted until the 7th round. There were some teams that crossed Devaughn Vele off their boards because of his age. He's going to be 30 years old when he hits free agency for the first time, when his rookie contract expires. Now, that's part of the value here, and the fact the Broncos turned a 7th round pick into a 4th round pick basically is tremendous. And got a productive season on top of that. So, well done, George Payton. But when you have these young receivers emerging, if you're saying, okay, we've got Pat Bryant, we've got Troy Franklin, we've got Devaughn Vele. Pat Bryant is a rookie, so he has 4 years of team control, and Devaughn Vele has 3. So right there, even if they were of the same age, you'd say advantage Pat Bryant. But Then if you start saying, okay, let's evaluate skill set here, who's going to be better? If you gave Pat Bryant, Devaughn Vele snaps, if you said, okay, they each get the same number of snaps, same number of reps, who's the better player by the end of the season? You could argue Pat Bryant. You could also argue Pat Bryant today is a better blocker today than Devon Vele, and Devon Vele has been in the league for a year. I mean, that is something that I think you can make a legitimate argument right now. I mean, not that Devon Vele has not put in the effort blocking. I mean, we know about how much he worked with Lil Jordan Humphrey to work on his blocking last year. That was something that he talked with me about as the season went on, and he was being very diligent about that. But Pat Bryant comes into the league with some serious blocking chops, and we saw the manifestation of that Saturday night on Evan Ingram's catch and run. The last 24 yards of that are basically Pat Bryant yards making that block downfield. So you can kind of see all the reasons coming into play here and crystallizing that set things up. The Broncos know this, and other teams doing their homework know this too. But that being said, I mean, Devon Vele has value because a rookie receiver, 41 catches, is who can win battles. A good contested catch receiver is going to have value. I mean, Devon Vele was probably going to be wide receiver 4, maybe wide receiver 5. Let's say he was wide receiver 4. Let's assume that the Broncos were going to go Courtland Sutton 1, and then wide receiver 2, as you know, Joe Lombardi was kind of alluding to this on Wednesday, and this was going to be the thrust of the show before the Vele news. Wide receiver 2 might be something that changes by the week. It could be Marvin Mims Jr. some weeks. It could be Troy Franklin some weeks. It may even be Pat Bryant some weeks. It may just be matchup based. But wide receiver 2, I think probably most weeks it will be either Troy Franklin or Marvin Mims Jr. if we're kind of defining it by use, not necessarily style, but use, who's utilized more often. And so that means if you're talking about Devon Vele being wide receiver 4, okay, how much are you going to get out of him then? And is that really optimal? He'll go down to New Orleans. He'll be no worse than wide receiver 3. Might even end up being wide receiver 2 when all is said and done. This may end up being something good for Devon Vele, even though he leaves a team that's a championship contender and goes to one that's probably going to be an afterthought in the standings. And that's on a personal level for him. That's going to hurt a bit, and certainly it's a tough day for him because he's going to leave behind relationships and friendships that he's built in the Bronco building. I mean, you have to be sensitive about this for him because it's, you know, when you get traded, it's a traumatic day. I mean, it may not be a huge trade in the grand scheme of the NFL compared to some other trades we see, but for him, it's the big one. For him, it's the big trade. It's the life-changing trade. He's got to uproot and start over again in a new city. I would say that it's possible for him long-term this ends up being something very good because I think when all is said and done, he's going to put up numbers down there that he probably would not have put up with the Broncos simply because he wouldn't have had the opportunity to put those numbers up with the Broncos. I mean, by the end of the season, he might have been wide receiver 5, and not because he wasn't good enough, but because he was in a crowded room. Down in New Orleans, he'll probably put up some decent numbers. I mean, now that being said, I can already see this coming, by the way, because I know how the hot take artists are. I know how they are. I know what they're like. What if Devon Vele goes down to New Orleans and puts up, say, 70 receptions for 850 yards? You know darn well there are going to be people who say, oh, see, the Broncos shouldn't have traded him. They made a bad deal. They shouldn't have traded somebody of that value. That, oh, blah, blah, blah. Well, you know what? He wouldn't have put up those numbers here with this team because he would have been stuck behind other players. They had a deeper room. His numbers here would have been considerably lesser than that. And oh, by the way, that New Orleans team is probably going to be playing from behind quite a bit because they're probably staring down the barrel of a 3-14 type of season. Thus, even with potentially lousy quarterbacking, Jay Kane or Tyler Shuck, Spencer Rattler, even with that type of quarterbacking, they're going to be passing quite a bit. And those quarterbacks are probably going to be throwing up some balls that are contested. And we know that Devon Vele can win some contested catches. So he's going to put up some numbers. But you know darn well there are people who are going to see the numbers he puts up and say, "Oh, they should have let him go. They shouldn't have let him go." Like people were saying that about Tim Patrick last year when Devon Vele was putting up a very Tim Patrick-like season and doing so at a fraction of the cost. I mean, the Broncos did not make a bad move letting go of Tim Patrick because Devon Vele basically produced the type of season that Tim Patrick would have, and now you've traded him and you've gotten a 4th-round pick back. So it was the right thing to do to move on from Tim Patrick to keep Devaughn Vele because you got a Tim Patrick-like season in production, and then you got this 4th-round pick back, which, oh, by the way, because the Saints are going to be bad in all likelihood, there's a chance that 4th-round pick might be the first pick of day 3, which could be a huge pick. You would love to have that pick. I hope as George Paton gets into his wheeling and dealing that he does not trade this pick, that he resists any temptation, that he and Sean Payton resist any temptation to trade this pick that they got from the Saints, because it may be the first pick of day 3 or it may be a very high pick on day 3. Either way, that is a pick that could have some tremendous value that you sit as you end day 2, going into day 3 of that draft and marinate on that. And we know there are some very good players that are always on the board headed into day 3 of any draft. Players of value, players that can help you. Heck, one of those guys is Troy Franklin, a guy who made it possible for you to make this trade today. QED. So, anyway, it gets a little bit off the After Dark vibe when I start going off on hot take artists and so forth, but I know what's going to happen. I mean, there are some people out there who are saying that making this type of trade is like questionable for a team that is thinking about Super Bowl. I mean, oh my gosh. All right. That's the type of thing that gives me a migraine. I almost cursed instead of bleeping migraine. It's stupid. Okay. First of all, you can do this because of the quality and depth that you have in the room. Just like when you traded Baron Browning last year, it was because of quality at the top of the depth chart, Nick Bonito, Jonathan Cooper, and because of the quality of depth that you had and were developing. Dondrea Tillman and Jonah Ellis. I mean, Vince Joseph just said it on Wednesday about Jonah Ellis, that he's becoming an X factor in his defense, okay? And we know about Dondrea Tillman, how efficient he was as a pass rusher last year. Well, the same thing is happening here at wide receiver, and we talked about Troy Franklin, we talked about Pat Bryant. But it's also about Trent Sherfield and how reliable he can be if he has to step in a pinch. He's going to be on the team as a special teams contributor. But it goes deeper than that, because the Broncos may still keep 6 wide receivers. Now, they do have some flexibility to go heavy at other positions now if they want to. They can go heavier at tight end. They can go heavier at running back if they wish. They can even go heavier at a defensive spot. But they can go with 6 receivers, and that 6th receiver can be somebody they make inactive on game days, which is more traditional to have 5 receivers active and 1 inactive on game day. So this is where some of those undrafted rookies who have flashed come into play. Is it a Courtney Jackson who has shown some adroitness and adeptness on returns? Certainly he's got some very natural return ability. He may well be your backup returner in case something happens to Marvin Mims Jr. We've seen some flashes from Kyrese Rowan in practice. We've seen flashes from Jerwan Newton in practice, making some tough catches down the sideline. But the guy I think that is probably the most intriguing of those undrafted players is Joaquin Davis, the rookie out of North Carolina Central, because of the attributes, because of the 4.36 40, because of the catch radius, because of the vertical. He popped on NFL radars with what he did at the HBCU combine that they had back in the wintertime. So every team's got his data. Every team's got his measurables. Broncos were able to bring him in. And now there's been a couple of games of film. He's come along as a blocker more quickly than I thought he would. But the film is showing what we've seen in practice, that the ball just sticks to his hands. And that's another thing. He's not a body catcher. He's a hands catcher. And it's what you want to see, not somebody who has to use his chest to bring the ball. And he just reaches out with that catch radius, and almost every time the ball just sticks. He's got a great set of hands. And is he somebody that you say, okay, we don't want to expose him to waivers. We want to try to get him on the 53. Now, the argument against that and the argument for exposing him to waivers is, of course, this set of numbers right here. For some reason, it's not responding to my clicks very well. That's why I think it's not going through. But there's the argument, and that's 3.9% of players at wide receiver who are waived at the deadline are claimed, and that's third from the bottom. So, in other words, you could say, in theory, a very good chance that a wide receiver like Joaquin Davis would pass through. But the other name that comes up is a veteran like A.T. Perry, who did return from the PUP list last week, was with the Saints in 2023. Pretty gaudy per catch numbers once he got on the field in the back half of that season. And then when Pete Carmichael, their offensive coordinator, longtime Sean Payton acolyte, when Pete Carmichael got fired after the season and, of course, was running Sean Payton's offense down there, A.T. Perry got kind of caught in the transition to a new offense, Kubiak offense, new scheme. And then when the Saints wanted to pass him through to the practice squad last year, they waived him. And then they tried to bring him back to the practice squad. And at that moment, Pete Carmichael and Sean Payton got on the phone and successfully lobbied A.T. Perry to Denver and lobbied him with a plan, or in the Sean Payton parlance, the vision. A.T. Perry spent last year on the practice squad from that point forward, but as he noted when I had a chance to talk with him in January, it was a productive season. It was one where even he talked about how as things went askew early last season in New Orleans, he was getting frustrated and to the point where he was even starting to feel some of his love for the game waning, and then he gets to Denver from New Orleans, and he said he felt his love of the game come back. He really enjoyed being around Sean Payton, said that Payton made time for him as a person, helped him individually, kind of worked with him individually. But then it's been frustrating for A.T. Perry this offseason. He gets injured. He misses OTAs. He misses minicamp. He misses the first few weeks of training camp. He doesn't get back until last week, so he's operating from behind schedule. He gets back. I mean, we see him out there. He's moving well and continuing to work his way back. I was a little surprised, frankly, that they brought him off the PUP list, because I thought that if you kept him on the PUP, here's a guy that knows your offense. He's in his third year in the scheme, basically. So he knows what to do. He mentioned that in his time on the practice squad last year, they even gave him some first-team reps from time to time. So he's gotten some work with Bo Nix as well. So he kind of got the whole package. He got some quality work, a chance to kind of refine his game going against Pat Surtain, going against Riley Moss. But then he also got some time to kind of get some cohesion, get some work in with Bo Nix. And I think that also tells you a lot that here's a guy on the scout team that they're making sure that they get him some reps with Bo as well to kind of get his feet wet and get him going there. So so it's interesting there. Now, the injuries that he's had over his career, probably that makes him a good candidate to pass through to the practice squad if the Broncos expose him. And certainly the investment that Pete Carmichael has in him, and certainly Pete Carmichael, a longtime Sean Payton assistant who's on this staff now. Pete's got Sean Payton's ear, so it wouldn't at all surprise me if A.T. Perry is still with this team next week on the practice squad. But in terms of like an overall picture of saying, okay, what makes you feel comfortable trading Devaughn Vele when you're a Super Bowl contender? And hey, you could have 2 injuries at wide receiver and all of a sudden your deep wide receiver room doesn't look so deep. Well, if you have confidence in a Trent Sherfield, in these undrafted rookies that have, all of them have shown that, I mean, we're not talking about superstars, but all of them have shown that they've got something, some kind of NFL quality attribute to where, okay, they can play. I mean, even Michael Bandy, kind of a perpetual practice squad guy, he always has a good camp. I mean, they've got guys, they've got players who, if you had to put them in a pinch, they can play. And this is, I think, part of what the Broncos are trusting here, that they're going to be able to put together a receiver room that even if they had multiple injuries, that they'd be okay without Devaughn Vele, that they're fine and they'd rather have the draft pick. That for a team that fancies itself a legitimate Super Bowl contender, that they can let go of a player who effectively was their wide receiver 3 when all was said and done last year. They can let go of that guy for assets that won't help them this year. I mean, these are draft pick assets. One's in the 2026 draft, one's in the 2027 draft. So these are future assets. I mean, the only way they help you this year is if you use one of them to make a trade at the deadline. But in all likelihood, these are assets that don't help you today. They help you tomorrow. So they traded an asset that could help you today for assets to help you tomorrow, because they are confident enough, not just in the guys that are stepping in the moment, but the guys that could have to step in if you have a couple of injuries. Just the same way they felt about the edge rusher room last year when they traded Baron Browning at the deadline. They got some criticism for it, but it was because they trusted what else they had in that room. Not just the guys on the top line, but the guys they had in reserve. All of that matters. Okay. What if the talent was so deep they were planning to cut Vele? No, Michael, they were not going to cut Devaughn Vele. I want to nip that in the bud. The Broncos would not have cut Devaughn Vele, period. End of discussion. Full stop. Sorry about that. I mean, I don't mean to kind of put the smack down on you there, but they would not have cut Devaughn Vele. Absolutely, absolutely not. So, yeah, that's I've seen a little bit of that out there. I that's why I just want to kind of nip that in the bud. I saw this earlier. No, Jarrett Stidham is not going to be traded. Just, I want to nip that in the bud too. No disrespect to Sam Ehlinger, but Jarrett Stidham is going to be here. Jarrett Stidham is going to be the backup quarterback. They've put 2+ years of development into Jarrett Stidham, 2+ years in the system, and now you've re-signed him to a 2-year contract extension. Here is the chance where you might get a chance. You might be able to bear the fruits of that investment in Jarrett Stidham. The longer quarterbacks are in Sean Payton's scheme, the better they usually get. And backup quarterbacks, this is true for as well. Usually Sean Payton's backup quarterbacks, they do better when they get at least another year in the scheme. See Teddy Bridgewater and his improvement from 2018 to 2019, for example. So I think that's one of the reasons why Stiddy has looked so good, because now we're talking about his third season in this offense. Looks more settled, looks more comfortable. But the big thing to me is like the decision-making and the processing is so much quicker. He's getting the ball out fast. He's reading things faster. This is all just because of how settled he is. I believe now we have reached the level with Jarrett Stidham in this scheme to where if you had to put him out there for 4 games against an average sample size of teams, which is to say one elite team, a couple of pretty good team of average middle tier teams, and then one bad team. So maybe just say, okay, roughly a group of, maybe not an elite team, but a very good team, but maybe roughly the first 4 teams on the schedule. Okay. The Chargers, even with Rashawn Slater hurt, the Chargers are pretty good to very good team. The Titans should be very bad. And the Colts and Bengals, somewhere in the middle, like the Bengals on the good end of the middle, the Colts maybe middle to lower end of middle, depending on how Daniel Jones does. It's a talented roster that has a quarterback question. But the first 4 games of the Broncos schedule, that's a pretty representative sample of the NFL. If you put Jarrett Stidham out there at quarterback for those 4 games with the rest of this team, I think the Broncos would go 2-2. And that's about what you expect from your backup quarterback. Point being, I've seen enough from Stidham in practice to where I no longer believe that if the Broncos had to put him out there that they'd be screwed. I think a couple of years ago I would have been like, oh boy, this probably won't go well. I don't feel that way anymore, just because of the growth I've seen from him. So that's my thing. Mathis might be a trade. Yeah, Damari Mathis might be a trade, and I'll actually throw that graphic up there on the screen again, because look where cornerback is. Look at second highest in terms of waiver claims, 8.36%. So that tells you that cornerback has some value on the waiver wire. And that's the sort of data that I think teams have. Look, if a chucklehead like me has this data, then teams have it. And that's the sort of data that you can use to say, okay, if you need a cornerback, here's a guy who started in the league as recently as 2023, first half of the season, was starting on a somewhat regular basis. Maybe we can work out a deal where we can make it the George Payton special. That's what I call the deal where you send a player and a 7th round pick for a 6th round pick. I call that deal the George Payton special. That's his mastery right there. To turn a 7th round pick into a 6th round pick for a player that you were going to waive anyway. That's George Payton. That is handiwork right there. So, well, don't know what I'm looking at, but I'll take your word for it. But I mean, what's the whole thing? You could get the Tommy Boy thing. You could take a look at a T-Bone State by looking up the Bulls, but you'd rather take the butcher's word for it, right? Oh gosh, yeah. Chucklehead, yeah. That's the pejorative term I like to use for myself to it's to keep the ego from getting in check. And it's what I would use a couple of years ago when Cecil Lammey and I would talk about the percentage of snaps where Jaleel McLaughlin was either targeted or got the handoff, and how it was like 70% of the snaps on a per game basis. That when he went out there, 70% of the time he was the target or he got the handoff, and how he checked in and defenses were shading over to him. And I would say, and what I always said is, if a couple of chuckleheads like us can figure this out, every other team has figured this out as well, that just him checking into the game was a tell, which is why he had to diversify his skill set and why he had to improve as a blocker, because it had to get to a point where Jaleel could be in the game and not necessarily be the target in order for him to be effective, because he became less effective as his rookie season went on, because teams knew if he was checking into the game, he was probably getting the football. So, anyway. So, which basketball players Sean Gang with the comp from? Oh, man. Yeah. I hate to be that guy, but if Ja'Cory Krosky-Merritt, who, by the way, wants to go by Bill, it's now coming out that he prefers to be called Bill. So if Bill Krosky-Merritt goes off for Washington in the game against the Broncos on Thanksgiving weekend, you know what's going to come up. It's going to come up that he was on the board when the Broncos took Caleb Lohner. And if you watch my other show, Orange and Blue Today, over at the Denver Sports YouTube channel, and you were watching back in late January, early February, you probably heard me tell you about Krosky-Merritt and how he was tearing it up at the Shrine Bowl, and maybe even seen the interview that I had with him. So anyway, I just want to point that out. I like JCM or BCM or whatever initials he wants to go by, and I'll say, I'm not saying I'm always right, Billy Packer would say of himself, often wrong but never in doubt, and I'll just say of myself, I'm gonna change that to sometimes wrong but never in doubt. But I felt pretty strongly about Krosky-Merritt as a prospect, and he's not disappointing me. So. Happy to see I'm streaming. Love the content. Yeah. I mean, now I'm streaming just myself. This is like I've said a few times. It's my test kitchen. I just wanted to practice doing some solo shows. And in fact, you can go elsewhere on this channel and see this is something I wanted to try, just like an 8 to 10 minute prepackaged thing on one topic. So I did a 9.5 minute piece on the Devaughn Vele trade that I sat down after Orange and Blue Today, set up the camera, and rolled, and did just a little package on the trade and what I thought about it. So you can check that out. Probably it's a more condensed version of a lot of my thoughts here. So if you want the long version, you have this here at Denver Football After Dark. If you want the shorter version, the Reader's Digest version, you can watch my little package elsewhere on this channel. I try to it's just kind of something for different audiences, right? Some people want the longer show, some people want the shorter show. That's why I have the stand-ups that I do from practice, and that's why I have the shorter things. It's, different people want different things. And that's what I'm going to provide. Sorry, I got a little itch in my nose. Like I've got to. Mom says I've got to use a nasal spray or something, and I have some. I just forget to put it in. So, Denver Football After Dark here on this Wednesday morning, which is focusing on the Devaughn Vele trade and the impacts. We've talked about the undrafted rookies. We've talked about A.T. Perry. I really want to make sure I got A.T. Perry in because he's progressing nicely in his return to the practice field, and it's sort of like you're saying, okay, don't forget about this guy because he definitely can play. Like I just watching the way he's moved out there, watching him in practice, it's like, okay, I can see this is still the guy that flashed at the Shrine back in the 2023 draft cycle. Still, the guy that flashed coming out of Wake Forest, a good prospect then, but of course now we're a few years removed from the draft cycle, and he did lose a lot of time, so he's got to play catch up. But Pete Carmichael's his guy, and he's been around him since the beginning, so he's going to have a very strong advocate with a very prominent voice in that offensive meeting room in Pete Carmichael, and someone that Sean Payton trusts and has listened to for a long time. So that's why I would not rule him out. Will Dre Greenlaw play in the Saints game? Needs some minutes. I expect he will. I expect you'll see Dre Greenlaw and Alex Singleton together. Will A.T. Perry getting reps in the Saints? That's an interesting question, especially given it's a turf field and he's just coming back. Maybe a question I ask Sean Payton tomorrow. Do I think Huff is getting the green dot? I think Alex Singleton's definitely getting the green dot. Definitely getting a green dot. Something Vance Joseph said on Wednesday that Alex Singleton is his eyes and ears. So I'd say the quarterback of that defense is still going to be Alex Singleton. So for what it's worth. But I do think to kind of go through those questions, I think you'll see Dre Greenlaw because I think Sean Payton and Vance Joseph, they want to see Greenlaw and Singleton together for a handful of snaps in the game. And not only in practice, but the game. So I think we'll see that. I think we'll see them. Does Estime get rotated to play more with starters this weekend, or is he cooked? I think he'll play, but I don't think you'll see him rotate in with the starters. And you're not going to see the starters much. I think this is starting offense. It's probably going to be 8 to 10 snaps, as Sean Payton has indicated for the first team or so. That's just not going to be enough, I think, to get Estime out there. It's going to be as the game goes on. So I think that's just going to be something that takes that just kind of takes some time. So. Denver football after dark here on this Wednesday morning. So anyway, I'm just kind of starting to go through some questions here as we go through this. Peyton will have a swing and miss at times. Yeah, I'm diving through the comments here, so I wonder if you're referring to Caleb Lohner. Oh, Derek Baird, man, appreciate that. You didn't have to do it. But let me find your comment here real quick. There we go. The staff's ability to draft and develop is outstanding. Paired along with their ability to scout bargain free agents is another huge advantage. Will keep us on the right side of the cap for years. And here's the thing: they're going to have to nail these things as well. And this is where George Payton is going to come in handy, because as they get more of these big contracts, because now, it looks like you're going to add Nick Bonito to this mix. And then eventually, if all goes well with Bo Nix, you're going to add him to the mix. Then it's going to become extremely important to nail your draft picks. And not just nail your top ones. You're going to have to nail your middle ones to late round ones as well. And then the other thing is, you don't want to get too crazy trading draft picks. Now, every so often, if you're in a year where you want to go for it, maybe you're going to make a trade of draft capital for a guy at the deadline. But if you do that, then it becomes more incumbent upon you to nail the draft picks with the selections that you still have. So that is a thing. And bargain free agents is going to matter, because what you're going to see, if the Broncos continue to have the draft, develop, and retain strategy, and I think they're kind of taking this Packers model of re-signing the players that they develop and that they like as soon as they can. Because if they get Nick Bonito done, they will have gotten him done before the regular season, before that value kicks up a notch. And they got Zach Allen done and Cortland Sutton done before another regular season kicked in. And they got Quinn Miners and Pat Surtain done before they got into the regular season last year. This is the Packer way of doing things, getting these things done before the fourth regular season of the rookie's contract. So by doing so, this is a way to kind of help keep get the maximum value for these contracts. But in effect, when you do this, this means your free agent shopping becomes more and more of retaining your own. So you're not shopping in March. You're not doing a lot of your shopping and spending in March. You're doing it in the previous year. And then what you do in March is supplemental. And I mean, it's interesting because the Broncos made some prominent signings in March, no question. Hufanga, Greenlaw, Engram, for example, and then Dobbins in June. What do they all have in common? They all have recent injuries. Even Engram missed nearly half the season last year. To some degree, these are scratch and dent guys. They're not primo. They're not quite Island of Misfit toys, but they're definitely the package has some wear and tear on them. It's the Sean Payton thing, about his parents and how they liked garage sailing, and then they get they went through all the sofas, and then they get the sofa home, and then he finds out it's got a wobble. Free agency is garage sailing, and then you got to know what you're looking for, but there's a reason why a lot of these guys are free agents. I've said it before, I'll say it again. If Talanoa Hufanga doesn't tear his ACL, the Niners don't let him go. They find a way to fit that contract in. If Dre Greenlaw does not tear his Achilles, they find a way to get that contract in. They squeeze it in. They make it work. They do things with contracts. They add some void years on other contracts. They start playing the game. They structure Brock Purdy's extension differently. They start doing all these things to fit the 10 pounds in the 5 pound bag, but they chose not to. So there's a reason why the Broncos got these guys, but at the same time, their value was not what it would have been because of injuries, and there were teams that were scared off. The Broncos weren't scared off because they trust their strength and nutrition methodology. They trust what Bo Lowry is doing to get better results. We're fixing to find out if that's going to work out or not. So, anyway. The metaphors are hilarious. Yes. The garage sailing. And that was... I'll take credit for getting that one out because that was from a question I asked. That was... I've gotten a couple of the Sean Payton metaphors out of him over the years, but I think that's my favorite one that I've gotten out of him in a press conference is the garage sailing one. And I like that so much because it reflects it actually reflected how I feel about free agency, that because I've said it a few times, there's a reason why guys are on the market, because the team, if they really wanted that player, they would have kept them. So, anyway, Ignacio Gomez, like I always say, thank you. I'm incredibly grateful when you do something like this. You don't have to, but I appreciate it. Get a cold pop Mason, Cecil 1-2. I'll do that. It's, hopefully Cecil and I will get another road trip at some point, and I'll do that for him. Do I think Powers will be a weak link for the offensive line? Well, with Adam Troutman mentioning on Tuesday just how much they're committing to wide zone, I mean, they're not going back on this. This is not something where they're installing it and they're going away from it. And he pointed out they are sticking with this. This is whole hog, full commitment. They're doing wide zone. This is not halfway. They're sticking with this. So Ben's got to get adept at this. And so it's not necessarily something that's his best skill set because he's definitely more power straight ahead. So, best thing I can tell you, Nate, is we're fixing to find out. In the words of Billy Bean, adapt or die, so to speak. And now you don't have Nick Gargiulo in reserve, so he's got to figure it out. But look, with what the Broncos were doing last year, he was top 5. He was top 5 win rate in pass block and run block. So it's not like you're starting from zero with this guy. It's not been the camp that it's not been the camp of preseason that you wanted, but he's been good enough to where I do think he's earned some grace. So we'll see. Frank Crum, you think he makes the 53? He's right on the border. Right on the border. Could go either way. The thing about it is, it's a question of deciding whether he's advanced enough to whether you think he won't slip through or not. He's made some progress. Has he made enough progress? So that is a very, very much a thing about it. So wide zone. I mean, the simple thing is wide zones designed to help stretch the field horizontally, create running lanes as much outside as inside, creases kind of flash open. You got to take advantage of when they flash open, make a quick cut and go. That's sort of the short version. I would say there's better and longer versions that you can find out there. Broncos have run a lot of elements of this over the years. You'll see a lot of it in the Shanahan-McVay offenses as well. So that's sort of that's kind of the Reader's Digest version of it. Position group has you excited, surprised you most off season. Defensive line, the depth on the defensive line. I have 7 defensive linemen making it because Eni Awazurike and Jordan Jackson have both looked really good. So that's right up there. Troy Franklin definitely has come a long way in every way. But I kind of got an indication that the way he answered a couple of questions last season about sort of what he learned from that, you could tell that there was a maturity settling in with him about all that he needed to do to succeed at this level, that he knew he was going to have to double his efforts this offseason, and very clearly he did. And I think that's led to the progress that he's made this year. So I definitely receiver, but the depth on the defensive line is there. It is one that's struck me. Maybe it's not so much a position group, but just players. Like Chris Abrams-Drain's progress has really been nice as well to watch. Jarrett Stidham continuing to make strides in this offense, and really, like I said, looking like a guy he has to come in for 4 games, can certainly hold his own as well. So. Do you think we'll check the practice squad of other teams for our needs this year? Nah, I think the Broncos really like their own practice squad right now. Based on the practice squad that they're going to have, I don't think they're going to be doing much scrounging from others. Let's see here. You think they'll? My bad. Sorry, wrong one. Who's left off to 53? Jaleel, Bidet, or Watson? Well. My initial 53, I said, that I put out there, I said it would be Bidet just because I thought he had a better chance to pass through. I'm going to do a revised 53 over the weekend. I may be thinking differently. Still confident with Crawshaw? Yeah, I am. And I love the quick answer when Luke Evans of the Denver Post asked Darren Rizzi about if you're going to bring in another punter. And Rizzi's like, no, still feel good. They're trusting the broader sample size that says that Crawshaw, most of his punts are great. Like Rizzy said, 10 of his 12 punts on Tuesday were terrific. And then there was one that was so-so, and then one that was not good. So that's basically 11 out of 12 punts that were acceptable. So, yeah, you're happy with that. It's just got to be there. Was wondering your thoughts on center. Wattenberg, the weak link. I mean, it was his first season as a center, as a starting center last year, and he's a good pass protector. Just he's not as good as you want as a run blocker. I mean, if you could take Alex Forsythe, the run blocker, and Luke Wattenberg, the pass protector, and put them together, you would have an all-pro at center. Unfortunately, you can't do that. So I'm curious to see how more wide zone helps him, because he was drafted in 2022 with more zone principles in mind. So in theory, it should help him. But in the preseason game, it wasn't, again, small sample size against the 49ers. It wasn't great, but I don't want to put too much into just one game and one quarter. So I'm not terribly concerned at this point, but it is interesting that he is in a contract year, and we've talked about these other contracts, and we have not talked about Luke Wattenberg. I asked him about it a couple of weeks back. He said it's not something he's thinking about, and I knew he was going to answer that. It's kind of the boilerplate answer, but sometimes you ask a question just to get a response on the record, and that was basically it. It's something that if a player is having a press conference or an availability and you know that there's not going to be many more chances, you know, because he's not one that usually talks on a regular basis, it's something that had to be asked, had to be put out there. I did. He gave the answer that I expected him to give, and then you move on. So, but that's something to consider, especially considering that the Broncos, you know, they drafted Forsythe the next year on day 3. They drafted Nick Gargiulo. Of course, the bad news with the torn ACL in the last few days with him. And then they signed Clay Webb, although it looks like Clay Webb probably practice squad for him, the way things are trending. So we'll see. So it's kind of up in the air right now as far as the long-term future for Luke Wattenberg. But again, a solid season for him in his first year as a starter. He and Bo Nix are on the same page. So I think the offensive line as a whole after last year, I think, has earned a little bit more grace than I think people are giving it right now. That would sort of be my general view. Changes in rules on kickoffs. I think we'll see more returns. I think the play is already more exciting. Darren Rizzi pointed out after the first week and then the extra Hall of Fame game that kickoff returns were up. So he was part of crafting the tweaks to the kickoff rule this year. So he's happy with it so far. And the first down measurements, it's working exactly as I thought it would. It's working like it does in tennis. You see it on the screen in the stadium. You see it on the screen on the television. And I always thought it would work like it did at tennis majors when you see it and you see the little spot with the ball and you see whether it's in or it's out relative to the line. And I always thought, and when I would watch it in tennis tournaments, I'd be like, why can't we have this in football? Well, now we have it in football. So, you know, we had the technology. They just were being stubborn. I don't miss the chain gang. So, anyway. Love these in the late nights. Thank you, top notch. Appreciate it, Beavis. It makes me think of my favorite Beavis and Butthead moment, which was when it's one of the Burger World episodes when they go down. It's the oil change episode when they think they have to change. They change the oil in the fryer, but they think they changed it with motor oil. And so they go down the street to the auto repair place to get some cans of motor oil. And the guy at the auto repair shop says he tried to get a job at Burger World. And he says, I guess to get in at Burger World, it's not what you know, it's who you know, huh? And the guy says, and the beef says, yeah, me and Butthead know each other. Gosh. Anyway. Courtney Jackson looked more like a natural with the ball in his hands than any of the other wide receivers. Yeah, definitely a natural, especially on returns. I mean, I think he's got a natural feel for where to go, how to adjust through the chaos of the blockers and everything moving as such. I think there's kind of a natural innate thing you have to have on punt returns, especially for being able to kind of see and navigate your way through to maximize the yardage there. I think that's something that Courtney Jackson has, the ability to maximize the yardage you get there, and I think he's got it. That was the thing that jumped out to me on the Arkansas State film in particular, on returns, how he really seemed to know where to go with the ball through traffic on returns and to make the most out of that. So, all right, yeah. What game should we wear our throwbacks this season? Well, I got to point this out. Washington has announced that one of the games they're wearing their throwbacks is they're going to wear them for the Sunday night game against the Broncos. So that begs the question, should the Broncos wear their throwbacks for that game? Now, granted, that would mean a uniform matchup that brought back Super Bowl 22, which would obviously bring back some Broncos historical nightmares. However, it would be a gorgeous uniform game. And I say that this is where the Broncos ought to be a good partner to another team. Sometimes you have to do something that helps out. Be a good sport. If Washington's going to wear the throwbacks for a home game like that, I think you play along and say, all right, we'll wear our throwbacks too. So I think, even though I'm ordinarily an advocate of saying throwbacks for all three home divisional games, I would say let's wear the throwbacks 3 times, and let's have one of them be that road game in Washington on Sunday Night Football, late November. I'm there for it. So, even though it's a bad game in Bronco history, but I think this is about being a good neighbor, a good partner, a good fellow member club of the National Football League. So it would look, I mean, let's just be honest. Washington wearing its throwbacks, the Broncos wearing their throwbacks, it would look fan-frickin-tastic. That would probably be the best uniform game of the year in the NFL. Because, first of all, the Commanders need to make that their uniform. That template, just go back to that. Just that's your uniform. That's it. Don't wear anything else. That's your Glory Day uniform. Just go back to it. You know, they changed the nickname. I'm not going to debate that, whatever. But go back to that uniform. That's a beautiful uniform. The uniform's great. They introduced that uniform design in 1979. There's nothing wrong with it. There never was anything wrong with it. Just go back to it. So, anyway. No, it's Washington's going to wear white with burgundy pants. It's because in the glory days, the salad days of that franchise, starting in 1981 when Joe Gibbs became the head coach, and Joe Gibbs came from San Diego. Remember, back in those days, San Diego wore white at home. When in the glory days of Dan Fouts and Don Coryell, the Chargers wore white at home with yellow pants. So Joe Gibbs came to Washington, and Washington started to wear white at home with burgundy pants. Washington wore white at home for every home game until 2001, and that's when they started to wear burgundy at home. And then Joe Gibbs came back in '04, and they went back to white at home. And then they started to kind of change, and sometimes it's white and sometimes it's burgundy. To me, if I were in charge in Washington, they would go back to these uniforms and they would go back to wearing white at home for every home game. That to me, that's there. Some teams should wear white at home. Dallas should wear white at home. Washington should wear white at home. Miami should wear white at home, except when it's a night game. Tampa Bay should wear white home, except when it's a night game or when they're doing orange throwbacks. Like there are a handful of teams that should wear white at home, and it's them. So, thank you for coming to my TED Talk. So, Commanders game. The Commanders game is probably, if I said, okay, what are the games I'm looking forward to most on the schedule? Chiefs, I think that's obvious, just because. Commanders might be right behind, though, the Chiefs games. Like, that's just, it's Jaden Daniels and Bo Nix. It's even like sort of the alternate history of like the Broncos interviewed Dan Quinn and didn't hire him when they hired Nathaniel Hackett, and like it's sort of like it's kind of the glimpse into like the alternate history, because yeah, they should have hired Dan Quinn when they hired Hackett. Now it's working out fine. It's working out very well right now. But when they hired Hackett, I'll admit I was a Dan Quinn guy. I thought that made the most sense. I'm a firm believer in the idea of hiring a coach who's done it before. I say, let the first time mistakes happen on someone else's dime. If I owned a team, I would always hire somebody who did it before. Just that's my little peccadillo here. And there's actually some data that shows that retreads, there's a better chance that there's better outcomes. But I did the research several years ago. So anyway, so I was Team Dan Quinn, and they hired Hackett. And Hackett was it was an interesting experience. But it's very interesting to think, what would have happened if they'd hired Dan Quinn. Yeah. Knew Hackett was going to be bad. Yeah, but I got a great answer when I asked him the double question, and the second part of my question was Star Wars. I did that solely because I wanted to catch him off guard. I didn't want to ask him a traditional question. That's sometimes I'm gonna throw a curveball at you, what's your Star Wars character? So I asked the football question, and I asked the Star Wars question, just because that. Okay, a couple more questions before I go off to go off for the night here. First of all, heard you say Keenum was fool's gold. What was your take on Drew Lock? Did you think he was really going to be the answer? Okay, so I'm going to tell you about Drew Lock. Settle in here. There's a little story. So I watched Drew Lock pretty closely in college. I hoped he would be the answer. I had hope for Drew. I had some skepticism. A couple of reasons. One, I wasn't seeing some of the bad habits get fixed. I saw strong arm, but I wasn't seeing kind of the footwork improve. I wasn't seeing some of the WTF throws go away. I was a little concerned that he was not going to break some of the ingrained habits that he had. And unfortunately, those concerns end up being part of what's limited him as a pro. I mean, it's tough because, like, you see him on the practice field, like, he's coachable. Like, he'll go out there and the coaches will tell him, okay, hey, you got to work on this, like, work on this in your drops. And he'll go out there and do it. And he'll do it right in practice. And then on the field, in duress, he'll revert back to kind of those ingrained habits and all of this. And it's the fact that the kind of the footwork is messy when he's in a clean pocket. The thing is, like, he's got so much raw arm talent. Like, he can fling it 65, 70 yards downfield, and he doesn't have to have his base set. And I can think back to a bunch of throws at Mizzou where he's just off balance and he just wings it, and it just fires, and he just can fire it off, and you're just like, whoa. And then he tries to get away with that with the Broncos, and he just can't do it. I remember there was one throw in the snow in Kansas City as a rookie, and it's all over his footwork's all over the place. And I think when he got picked off, and I saw that, and I remember turning to the person sitting next to me, and we both looked at each other, and I just said, like, you cannot get away with this at this level. Like, you can get away with that in college, but you can't get away with that in the NFL. Because I'd seen throws like that from him in college, and it's like he just, for whatever reason, he could not break free of that. And it was hard. It's hard. I mean, but it's things like that. They're the difference between the quarterbacks that do kind of become the perennial starters and the ones that kind of settle in at a lower level. So, I mean, that's where, again, like, the hope never actually kind of translated being more than what he's been. So, yeah. So, anyway, I mean, it's funny, like, people talk about the dancing and the bench. You know what? I mean, to me, that's not relevant. I mean, so he has a little fun, so he's lighthearted. I mean, that's not. So that I don't think that's a thing. I mean, these are things that really don't mean all that much. Because, I mean, certainly with his teammates, I mean, that doesn't really matter all that. That doesn't really matter all that much, especially with a young team like that team was at that moment. And I think also back at that moment in Houston in 2019. Do y'all remember the picture of Drew and Dalton Reisner and Noah Fant together on the bench in Houston when the Broncos, they're pummeling the Texans, and then someone I think one of the Broncos photogs got a photo of them together, and they put it out there, and you're like, man, I mean, maybe that's the future of this team. And unfortunately, that future proved to be a dead end, or at least a cul-de-sac. But yeah. It was that, but leader of men, Drew, and that's that too. But I think if things had gone differently, I think he could have grown into that role, because it's not something that happens overnight. I think maybe the team would have grown in a different way, but didn't work out. I mean, there are other things around him. I think. Having a more experienced offensive coordinator might have helped, but this is another thing. If a quarterback needs all these other things around him to go perfectly, what's the ceiling on that guy? Like, Drew probably needed everything to break perfectly to be a decent NFL quarterback. So the ceiling wasn't going to be that high in all likelihood. Whereas, there are some guys, if they, like, Patrick Mahomes has uber talent, he probably would have worked out no matter what. Certainly helped that he had Andy Reid, an all-time coach, but he probably would have succeeded in eventually almost anywhere because of the talent that he has. There are certain guys, like Peyton Manning probably would have succeeded with almost any coach and in almost any situation. There's some that is sort of the case. There are some, like Michael Jordan would have been a great player no matter where he went. So that is another thing to kind of consider, that there are some that they just have it and they would succeed anywhere. But then there are some that need the right situation and they need the right things around them. I think it's like Bo Nix, it's interesting to consider. Is he one of those guys that would succeed anywhere, or is he someone that is succeeding in the right situation? And this is the right situation. And there's nothing wrong with that, but then does that mean his ceiling is kind of like in that top 10, top dozen, rather than say like a Mahomes ceiling or a Josh Allen or a Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen ceiling? Is his ceiling like QB 5 to 8, which you can certainly win it all with? That's another thing, but you win in a different way. And that's something that we're fixing to find out about Bo Nix and these Denver Broncos. So anyway, Denver Broncos, Denver football after dark here on this Wednesday morning. It's been a fun show. Big day with the Broncos trading Devaughn Vele, but certainly saying a lot about the state of the receiver room. And I think, me being a draftnik, I'm looking forward to hopefully the Broncos keeping that pick and having an early pick in the 4th round. It'll make that, if they keep that pick, it'll make that show after day 2 of the draft a lot of fun when I'm sitting there going through 8 to 10 players that I'm like, okay, I hope they get this guy. I hope they get that guy. Because you know me, I go down to the Shrine Bowl and I go down to the Senior Bowl and I fall in love with like 10 to 15 guys and they're still on the board. And I hope they get one of them. So happens to me every year. That's why I love those weeks, because they're all about possibility and optimism and hope and the next generation, and then seeing those guys develop. It's something that renews me and makes me feel young again every year. It's like seeing Christmas through a child's eyes every year. Makes you feel young, makes you feel excited and optimistic again. Would Mahomes had same success without Andy Reid? Okay, maybe not. Maybe he wouldn't have gone to, 5 Super Bowls in 6 years, but he still would have been a great quarterback. That's what I'm saying. He might not be all-time God tier level, but he still would have had a great career. That's what I'm talking about. So anyway, appreciate you joining me here on this. And yes, I'm in Denver right now. I'm in Denver most of the year. Part of the off season, I am in Wisconsin or with my family, or points, or Florida with my mom, checking out things and taking care of her and watching out for her. But during the season, I am in Denver, and appreciate you joining us. Appreciate you hanging out with me in these late night hours here, talking Broncos football, talking about other things that cross our paths here. And I will be here tomorrow. It might be a little different tomorrow because I do have a Friday morning flight to New Orleans, so I'll be on here at some point to talk about everything that happens on Thursday, as the Broncos have one more practice and then they head down to Louisiana for Saturday's preseason game. It might be a little different Friday, Saturday, so I'll let you guys know kind of what's in the cards for Friday headed into Saturday, because that Saturday game is early, 11 a.m. Mountain Time. So the schedule for this show might look a little different the next few days, but there will be a show Thursday night at some point. So keep a lookout for that here on this channel. And of course, Cecil Lammy and I will have Orange and Blue Today Thursday at 5 p.m. Mountain Time, 5 p.m. Mountain Time as well, on Denver Sports YouTube channel, Facebook channel, Twitter, X channel, etc. So appreciate all the kind words and all of y'all joining me here for this edition of Denver Football After Dark. And until next time, take care. Thanks for watching. If you've enjoyed this show, like, comment, share, subscribe. Thanks for joining me on this program, and take care. I'll see you next time.